On my hand here is one of the most expensive 50mm equivalent lens, and this is the Hasselblad 65mm f2.8. And in today's video, I'm going to review this lens, share with you my thoughts, and is it worth to buy it for the Hasselblad system? I'm Richard, welcome to Zappy Productions, and today I'll be reviewing the Hasselblad 65mm f2.8 lens. And if you are living in the full frame world, this is something of a 52mm f2 equivalent lens. So that is the comparison basis. Now, for this particular review, I also compare it to the GFX 63mm f2.8. Now, both of these lenses are roughly in the same era. They came out around 4 years ago or something, when the system is relatively new. So they are comparable, and something that I want to share with you in this particular review here. Not only that, both of them are medium format systems, and I think this is a good comparison to know whether this lens lives up to expectations, considering how expensive it actually is. But first, let's talk about the build quality. Now, this lens is a full metal construction lens, and this is also weather sealed. There is a gasket around it. Now, this lens, I don't know, Hasselblad probably thought at that point in time it wants the simplest lens that they can ever design. This lens have no other switches and buttons, just a big ass focusing ring. It does make the lens look good, but it does make the lens pretty useless on the outside. Now, this lens has a leaf shutter, and it also extends when autofocusing. Let me show you. It does extend significantly, in fact. And its autofocusing motor is pretty loud. And when you take the shot, the leaf shutter is also pretty loud too. It does feel nice to hear the sound, but it's a pretty loud shutter. Overall, I think that this lens is very well built. It built in with leaf shutter. It autofocuses not really too quick anyway, but I think the construction-wise, pretty decent, I guess. Now, if you compare to something like the 63mm here, this guy is absolutely lightweight. I mean, this lens is like 700 over gram. This lens, I believe, is like 400 gram or something. Lightweight. It's also made of metal, but this lens just feels like a tank. Feels like you can use it as a hammer to hit nails. I mean, don't do that. It's a $4,000 lens, but yeah, that's the difference you get out of this lens. Now, there's one thing about this lens is that it comes with a metal hood, and I'm not a fan of metal hood, and that's because when you keep it up, this metal hood is meant to protect the lens and also protect the lens from other lenses. So when you put it in the bag, if you do knock other lens, this metal hood will scratch other lenses. It may happen. I mean, the worst thing is to have a lens scratched by a hood. Not only that, when you do put on this lens hood back onto the lens, and you go like that, it just doesn't feel good that you hear this metal scraping sound because this hood is rubbing against the barrel of the lens. So a metal hood is premium, but I feel that I prefer a plastic hood so that doesn't damage my lens and damage anything else along the way. And not only that, when metal hood wear off, it turns silver, so not very nice. And when you drop it, it will dent. While plastic hoods, well, they won't dent until you crack it in half. So I do prefer plastic hoods. I mean, they just don't look as premium. This is a 63mm hood from the GFX system, but yeah. I mean, that's how I feel about hoods. There's also the last thing, the most unusable thing of this Hasselblad lens is that you have to align this hood perfectly. There is this triangle and the marking that you need to align perfectly. If not, you cannot tighten the hood on the lens. And unlike other hoods where you can probably tighten it on 2 or 3 points, this hood can only be tightened on 1 point. So you have to stare at the marking to put the hood in. So I don't know why Hasselblad does that, but they did it. Not very good, I mean. Okay, that's all for the physical aspect. The next thing I want to talk about is autofocus. Well, it's not very quick. I mean, you have seen just now the autofocusing motor. It's loud, it's slow, it's not very quick. It's not much worse than the 63mm I have here with the older GFX system. I think the Hasselblad camera body is still the one that is resulting the slow autofocus. Well, maybe for medium format, you don't really care about autofocus speed, but yeah, it is not very quick. And when it comes to accuracy, it's pretty okay. I mean, out of the hundreds of shots I've done over the weekends, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 shots that were out of focus. Not a big deal. If anything, I think it's the autofocus point, not on the subject itself. So I think it's fine. The autofocus accuracy is in the 95-98% region. Not the Canon R3 edition as good as that, but I think it's pretty much okay for a medium format. I mean, quite on par with whatever I have experienced in the GFX before. And even in backlit situations, at least for this lens, I don't feel like it struggles with it. There is no IS for this lens. It is a very simple lens, so IS is provided by the body. You can shoot at 1/10 of a shutter, but no, this is not provided by the lens itself. So the most important thing to talk about a medium format lens is image quality. And I think for this price point especially, and considering there's a Hasselblad, you are expecting something of it. And I can just say that some things are better, and there are some things that could be improved with this lens when it comes to image quality itself. And just for the benchmark purpose and to compare with something that most people know, this is the GFX 63mm lens, and it's going to be used for comparison using a GFX 100 camera. So let me show you, in terms of sharpness, I think the lens from Hasselblad, the 65mm, is fantastic. It is sharp in the center and sharp all the way to the edges. And it is sharper than the GF lens here. And I'm not saying that it is like minor sharpness that you cannot detect. You can actually see it. It is sharper all the way to the corners themselves. And the sharpness, well, I'll say as you probably don't really care about stopping down if sharpness is your biggest consideration. However, just to note that because Hasselblad do not have profiles applied to their lens automatically, their corners are a little bit darker than the Fujifilm ones. And then there is one thing I noticed while looking through all these images, and that is this lens suffers from a certain aberration. I don't think this is chromatic aberration, it is probably spherical aberrations, where bright areas do bleed into the edges, but they bleed with the color of the light. No, it doesn't bleed with that chromatic aberration color, which is the disgusting purple, green, but it bleeds with the color of the light itself, as you can see at the top of the building. You can see also next to it is the GFX photo, the GF 63mm lens, and there is no such bleeding that's happening here. So there is this aberration, and this aberration is more obvious in the next shot for nighttime. So the nighttime scene, you can see here, if I zoom in on the tubes, you really cannot see, anything special that's happening. I mean, it looks relatively neat of a shot, but if I was to raise the exposure up all the way to about 4 stop plus, you will see this glow and red tint around all these light tubes. Now, as I say again, this is probably a spherical aberration. I don't think it's a pure chromatic aberration. It doesn't even feel like a chromatic aberration to me, but it is glowing, and this glow is only obvious when you do significant amount of recovery for the shots. So that is something to note. It does have aberrations, and I don't think it's exactly chromatic, it's more spherical in nature, but it does result in the bleeding of light. Now, if you look at the corner here, where there is other light sources, you can see that the bleed is whatever light source it is. If it is a white light source, it bleeds white. If it's a blue light source, it bleeds blue. If it's an orange light source, it will bleed red. So definitely the aberration is there. You really cannot run away from it. And if you are going to shoot such, I'll say, as glowing objects at night, just note that it will happen. The other thing is also the chroma. At the edge of it, you can see the distorted lights, and this chroma is really strong, especially with the glow itself. It looks like giant birds at the corner. So that's something to note for the chroma of this lens. Now, if you stop down to f11, all these aberrations go away. You can see that the tubes are now perfectly neat. And so if you are a landscape shooter, as long as you stop down, I think these aberrations will not affect you. Now, I also stopped down to show you the Sunstars, and this lens do provide nice 8-pointed Sunstars that are very neat. I just feel this is one of the neatest Sunstar I've ever seen so far. So that's something that if you are interested in, well, it's there. Nice, neat Sunstars. Now, the bokeh balls also something to show you. I defocus the lens totally and show you the bokeh balls. Now, the bokeh balls wise, I think there's no onion ring. There is just a ring on the outer rim, quite normal for modern lenses. And this ring itself, well, if you overlap multiple rings together, I don't think it's that obvious. So I think it's pretty okay still. Overall, I think these bokeh balls at least looks pretty normal to me. Nothing outstanding or special. Now, how does all this translate to real-world shooting itself? Firstly, I would say that the glow at the edges doesn't really affect me as a portrait photographer. If I'm having some sort of a bright source of light, a nice little glow actually is pretty nice to me. So I shot portraits, and I think the sharpness really helped. You can focus in the center, focus at the edge, focus at the corner. Well, anywhere you focus is really, really sharp. And to show you some of the photos where I can zoom in 100%, you can see the sharpness is biting sharp. And it doesn't really have all these weird aberration effects, at least when I'm shooting portraiture and I don't have such extreme difference between a glowing source and a non-glowing source of the photo itself. And then when I shoot some black shiny clothing, you can see some of the chromatic aberration. And this is, I'm pretty sure this is chromatic aberration. It's very, very minor. Only that small little area with that shiny dots. And then you have chromatic aberration. And I also noticed that chromatic aberrations mainly appear not so much in the focal plane, but it's like slightly in front of the focal plane. So this is probably more of a longitudinal chromatic aberrations. I also noticed it in another shot at the collar here. Those slightly out of focus areas have this chromatic aberration effect. So I'm pretty sure this is longitudinal chromatic aberration, not so much of latitude chromatic aberration that, you know, we are usually associating with. So that's the reason why I'm pretty sure that glowing tubes are not so much of chromatic aberrations, but more of some sort of spherical aberrations that is in this particular lens itself. I also did some other shoots with the lens to just try out the leaf shutter. It does sync nicely 1/1000, so no issues on that. Daytime syncing looks perfectly fine, you know, with the leaf shutter. And overall, I think I really enjoy this lens. It's just so sharp, edge to edge. Very, very nice to use, very, very pleasant to use overall. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is also the bokeh, because this is a 50mm f2 equivalent type of lens. There is some bokeh when you need it. I wouldn't say the bokeh is fantastic, neither is it the smoothest in the world. I would say as it's okay, and I'll leave it as that. And it's pretty much okay. I mean, you just want our focus region, it's there for you. So overall, how do I feel about this lens? I think this lens could have been optically better. I mean, the glow would have been nice for portrait, but I would have preferred a slightly cleaner lens when it comes to aberrations. However, for my purpose, the sharpness is great. The chromatic aberration itself is actually very well controlled. Only that glow in the lighting, which I don't notice much in real world shooting itself. And with the leaf shutter, I really do enjoy this lens immensely. I mean, the X2D could have been adapted with other lenses, but you know, without the leaf shutter, I just don't like it. So with the Hasselblad lens, it's not so much of whether is the lens worth it or not, but do you like it enough to spend the money for it? And that's pretty how we should be looking at Hasselblad lens. It's never value for money. I mean, a lens that is worth 4,000 Sing dollars, and this is like less than 2,000 today. I just cannot say it's value for money. But is it worth it to buy? Or should I say, is it something that you will want to buy if you're into this 50mm range and you shoot portrait? Then for me, it's totally yes. But for you, if you are intending to shoot in certain cases that I highlighted just now that don't work very well, maybe this is not the lens for you and you should skip this lens. But then again, if you skip this lens, there is really not many options in the market for you if you are a Hasselblad user. Overall, I think that Hasselblad has produced a very nice lens at the 50mm mark. Well, now there's the new 55mm f2.5. I have yet to test it. I'm not sure whether is it optically better. I assume it is because it's a newer lens. But that is a like 43mm lens. So if you want a 50mm, this is still kinda your only way. So, you know, even though this is like 65 versus that 55, you know, this is 52 and that is probably closer to something 44, 43mm. So there is really not much options if you are looking for a 50mm light lens for Hasselblad. Now, it's only whether can you live with it, and if you can live with it, I think this is a fantastic piece of equipment. Now, in the future, I'll probably be reviewing more Hasselblad lenses. I mean, a lot of these lenses are owned by me, so it is going to be a very opportunistic thing. Because Hasselblad lenses are very expensive, I'm probably only going to buy it if I can find a second hand. And luckily, I found a second hand 90mm f3.5, or is it, wait, f3.2, which I'll review in the next episode itself. This 65mm, however, I purchased it brand new because I just want a 50mm lens for the flexibility of it. And I think it does produce that quality that I can live with. And actually, not live with, I can be very happy with most of the time. I think Hasselblad produced a very interesting system. I just want to once again sum up that Hasselblad systems are for the niche, and this is really for people who appreciate certain things about Hasselblad, be it the color, the size, the shape, or the leaf shutter, such as flash photography. If you like such things, I think the Hasselblad system is a worthy purchase. If not, I think the GFX system is still more of a sane choice. I mean, this is 2,000 versus this 4,000 Sing dollars item. And well, other than the corner sharpness, this is better in every way for optical quality. So, that's something to note. Just that it doesn't have a leaf shutter, so, well, just live with it. I mean, build quality is also pretty okay on this lens, I guess. Well, that's really about it, and I hope you enjoy this short little review. I'll see you next time for my next review on Hasselblad lenses, the 90mm f3.2. Until then, bye-bye.